I've just got some slides to pop up, so just bear with me. Okay, right, straight into the next one. You'll all be sick of hearing of me. So I don't know whether there's anybody that jumps on additionally within this, or whether everybody just stays on. For those of you who maybe missed the beginning or didn't quite catch, so I'm Emma Mackenzie Hogg from the Youth Sport Trust. My role is Development Manager for Primary Education, and we are going to really focus in, continuing on really in terms of really supporting that COVID recovery, but really utilising the key funding that we have with the PE and School Sport Premium. So again, we're going to update a little bit on the national guidance for PE and Sport Premium. There has been an important update today, which I will share with you. Then we're going to look at how we can really best align and realign some of this funding. I am going to look at it through the lens of remote education. I know we have transitioned back, but I don't necessarily think it's the end of remote education. We've really moved forwards and created so much and utilised technology that I think it's always going to be with us, whether we are still going, we're still going to have classes going off and self-isolating until we have max vaccination in place. And also, I think in the future, we will still have remote learning and remote education. Gone are the days of snow days, which is a sad thought, really. And then really look at it through the lens of active recovery and how we can utilise that funding. We're then going to look a little bit at your action planning and making sure that that intent is informed by insight and that impact is measurable. So again, building on the model that we've just shared in our first session. And then we're going to really share some examples and insights from schools and partners as well. So a little bit of a recap on PE and Sport Premium. So this won't be anything new to you. So we know that the funding is very much there to make additional and sustainable improvements to the quality of PE and sport that you offer. It's very much to develop or add to PE, physical activity and sport activities that you provide, but most importantly, to really think about building capacity and capability so that whatever you invest in now not only benefits your current pupils, but really will enhance the learning journey and the experience of pupils joining in future years as well. So always be really mindful of that in terms of that sustainable legacy piece with your investment. Also, just a reminder there of how you should not be spending your PE premium. So around employing coaches or specialist teachers to cover PPA assessment. Really important that teachers are teaching PE. So you may invest in a sports company or coach company, but they should be utilised to be brought in for CPD and supporting teachers to upskill themselves, and teachers should still be present with them. And particularly right now, that's obviously been massively impacted around I guess the feasibility of these companies coming in, but also the importance of the subject of PE for teachers right now, because teachers really do need to be able to see their pupils within a different context, and in PE is so valuable across, as we've said, the social, emotional, the cognitive, as well as the physical, for teachers to really understand what's going on for their pupils right now, and importantly for teachers and pupils to build that all-important relationship back up. So yeah, really an opportunity now that we're making sure teachers are teaching PE. And then obviously a reminder there around other elements of where it shouldn't be spent. Capital expenditure is always a funny one, in the sense that it's very much down to what your school policy is in terms of what you define capital expenditure to be. And I know there's been some questions around that recently, particularly because schools are sitting on quite big underspends because of lockdown, and whether some of that can be invested in infrastructure or equipment and or larger capital expenditure. The specification from DfE is still as was, and that it can't be, but as I say, check what your school policy is and what constitutes capital expenditure, and who knows if something might change in terms of the guidance going through the rest of this year. Just a reminder then as well around the 5 key indicators that the funding has to be spent in line with. So again, you'll be familiar with these. And often if I deliver this session face to face, I often get delegates to stand up to indicate where they have invested most of their funding to date. And often it tends to be key indicators 3, 4 and 5. I think 4 and 5 particularly because it tends to have built on the foundations that have been in place around sport, competition and the enrichment offer. But obviously key indicator 4 can also extend into your PE offer and making sure that you're offering a broad and balanced curriculum and you're able to offer a range of sports and activities. So do view that with a PE focus on as well. We know a lot of investment is around staff CPD and building confidence and competence, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit more, and I challenge you to think a little bit differently about that staff CPD and development. But often we don't always see a great deal of investment in key indicators 1 and 2. Some of that might be because there isn't a financial investment, around the physical activity agenda. Some of that you can do quite naturally without having to throw a lot of funding at. And 2 is always, I think, a challenge in terms of that really embedding and changing culture and ethos and connecting PE and support to wider whole school priorities. So for my session today, I'm really going to home in on key indicators 1, 2 and 3. That's not to say that there shouldn't be investment at 4 and 5. And we know there's been a big hit on competitive sport, obviously, during this time. But I just felt to best utilise the time, really homing in on 1, 2 and 3 would be most beneficial, just to get you thinking differently about some of that investment in those spaces. So in terms of reporting with the premium, a reminder that you need to make sure that you publish details of your PE and sport premium spend by the end of the summer term, so the 31st of July at the latest. Now, really, this isn't something that's almost a tick box, though. It's an action plan. It's a working document. It's something that should be put on the website, but should be reviewed and updated regularly. Not something that you think by the time you get to June, oh, we've not done it, or we've not updated it on the website. It very much should be on there now already, and should be, as I say, a working document. It doesn't matter if it is not all set in stone, if it is not all spent, if it has to change and adapt. That shows that it's servicing the right, you're approaching the funding in the right way because you're evolving and adapting in line with the needs of your school. And if you were to have an Ofsted inspection and you had a deep dive in PE, for example, and they unpicked some of that on the web, they do check the website in advance. They would look at the PE premium action planning and the reporting template, but to be able to evidence how you're using that as an action plan and a working document is only going to benefit you. So do make sure that it's up there and it's very easy to find on your website. And here is the change that has been announced today, which some of you may have seen on social media channels. And your school should be receiving official communications from the DFE tomorrow to confirm this, but that previously any underspend that you had from last academic year had to be spent by the end of the 31st of March. Obviously, recognising that we went into a third lockdown in January, there's obviously been then a further knock-on effect with that funding. So that underspend from last academic year can now be carried over to the end of this academic year. As yet, we do not know if you are sitting on underspend from this academic year, how that is going to relate and whether that will be extended. But what I would say, really importantly, is spend. Spend, spend, spend. Do not end on the side of caution, because most importantly, when we have funding like this, we want to be saying that it's been utilised. We don't want to be sitting on massive underspend, which questions then how useful the funding is. So do view it in that light, and some of the ideas and suggestions I go through today hopefully will allow you to think about how you can spend the funding if you're sat on an underspend. And even if we do go into, heaven forbid, another lockdown, but how you can still utilise that funding even if you have students in remote learning situations. And then just some details there in terms of what your online reporting needs to include. And then just a reminder around swimming, which obviously has been massively impacted over the last year, but normally you would need to publish what percentage of pupils within your Year 6 cohort have met the national curriculum requirements as set out below. Last year, obviously, with that being impacted so much, schools had to report on any data, the most recent data that they had in relation to the Year 6 cohort. So that might have been from where they did swimming in Year 4. and not knowing what's going to happen in terms of if a school has their own swimming pool, they may be starting to resume some of their swimming lessons and may be able to deliver on some of this. Many schools will be relying on external providers and external pools, which we know are not yet open, and the forecast for that is still somewhere down the line. So all I would say is being mindful of the swimming piece. Do look at what data you currently have for your current Year 6 cohort, and that may be what you need to submit within your reporting template when we get towards the end of the summer term. Okay, just wanted to get some thoughts from you really, and a chance for you to use the chat function. Just want you to think, first of all, what are your current challenges as a PE subject leader right now, obviously in the current situation, and do think about that strategically, operationally, resource, engagement. And I must own up, actually, because we're on Teams and I am sharing, I'm not sure how to access the chat, so I'm not actually getting all your fabulous feedback. So I don't know if anybody wants to...
Emma, there's not been any questions come in, but at the top of your screen you'll have a little question mark, and if you hover over it, it says Q&A, but there's not been any questions come in as yet.
Oh no, that's good. No, I've not got a question mark.
I think because Emma's sharing her screen, it fills her PowerPoint fills the whole screen, so
yeah.
you can't see any of the functional buttons.
No problem. Well, we won't do it as interactively as I had planned. And what I will do is, if there are, please do, if you do have questions, I will obviously pick up at the end, so you won't be asking a question in vain. But normally things that would come up for this, when I would do this session virtually, things like obviously, operationally, right now, you've got challenges around facility space because we've got hall space being used as additional classrooms. Weather is a challenge in terms of getting outside for lessons. In some instances, PE is being cut because other subjects are being prioritised for pupil catch-up already, even though we know that actually pupils right now need PE and being active more than ever. Resource continues to be an issue in some instances, particularly with additional equipment or resources needed because of cleaning restrictions and bubble use and things, and just general engagement, which again, if you have been doing PE remotely during lockdown, you know how you get that engagement with families and pupils, and then also engagement coming back in, and that might be not only be pupils but the engagement of your staff in terms of delivering PE right now. If you think of teachers who are not confident in PE right now, it's an added layer when they've got all these restrictions to consider, and moving children out of the classroom into a different learning environment for some is really daunting. So you've got a real mixed picture there. And the other question was really around what the needs of your pupils are. So I'm going to share some of that with some of the data that we've developed. So just to echo some of the things that I've mentioned there, when we conducted our return to PE survey back in September, this is what a lot of schools were telling us, and obviously this reflects the picture across primary and secondary and some of the differences really. But some of the logistical issues relating to delivering PE, things like I say, wet weather, lack of facilities and space, not sure on the guidance and the rules of delivery, reduced access to resources and equipment, like deprioritisation of PE. So you may sit there thinking, oh yeah, I identify with some of that. That's definitely a challenge right now in our school. And then, as I've shared in the other presentation, this wider impact and what our pupils need right now from a mental health perspective on the left-hand side, the physical perspective in the middle, and the educational outcomes and the educational gaps on the right-hand side. And as I said before, you know, this is the national picture, but do be mindful of what you know of your pupils, you being the experts of your pupils, and actually what do they need right now, and how is the premium going to be, using that funding effectively to support that. And as I touched on, obviously right now a real focus on an active recovery, and ourselves along with other partners in the sports sector are really driving this approach to an active recovery and really positioning sport, PE, physical activity as a means to really support pupils. But that is also seeing that in the bigger picture around, the arts, music, things that our pupils really need now in terms of reconnecting and that creativity piece. And as I say, I'm not touching it in the last session, so I'm not going to go too much on it, but how we know our subject absolutely can support that recovery, and how, again, thinking about your pre-premium investment, you are really targeting that investment in line with what your pupils' need is and how you're delivering that across PE, sport and physical activity. So I'm going to touch on that when we start thinking about the key indicators. And then I'm just going to play a video with you. And this is taken from one of our primary catalysts, St Fidelis School in Bexley, London. And we've got a number of these case study videos, again, on our coronavirus support web pages that look at where schools have started to position sport, PE and physical activity as part of the recovery of their pupils, how they've done that, how they've aligned some of that. So again, a lot of this is some of the video clips that we shared in the other session, but this sort of pulls it all together and just looks at the real approach that was taken. Do let me know if it doesn't play. Stop me straight away if the volume's not there.
Hi, I'm Vicky Ball. I'm a PE specialist teacher in St Fidelis Catholic Primary School in Bexley, which is in South East London. I'm lucky enough to teach all of the children from reception all the way up to year 6. Since coming back from lockdown, we found that our children have really suffered in their physical and mental stamina. In the classroom, we found that physical activity helps break up the classroom learning, and we found that in PE settings that the children just can't sustain the physical ability for as long as they could previously. In order to combat this, when the children first came back in September and we saw this physical difference, we've tried to ensure that the lessons have breaks in their physical activity levels. So, for example, we'll do short, sharp bursts of real intense physical, and then maybe break it up with some kind of mental games or some cognitive understanding. So we ensured that throughout the hour lesson there were lots of little bursts of activity broken down with some time to rest. Also, the majority of these lessons were being able to take part outside. So in the first instance, coming back and we didn't know what facilities or what the guidelines were maybe suggesting, we were able to do a lot of them with minimal equipment and outside. Something else we do as a school, which has really helped us since coming back in September, is start the year across the whole phase from sort of foundation stage all the way up to year 6, is a unit of work called Games for Understanding. The idea of the Games for Understanding unit is it actually strips back a lot of the physical abilities that maybe some children won't have if they've got gaps in learning. The idea of this unit of work is that it's all games based and play based, and that the children take part in lots of different activities without really the need to be physically able in lots of areas. This is a really good way of just getting baseline movement again and letting the children enjoy being physically active.
Now that we're getting to the second stage and the second half term of our recovery curriculum, we're beginning to learn HRE lessons, which is health related exercise.
With an understanding of why it's important to be physically active, but also understanding the changes in our body that might occur when obviously we're in a lockdown and we're not as active as we were previously.
Your heart beats fast. The heart pumps blood all around your body.
I also shared with the children that they were improving in their mental stamina and their physical stamina. And this was a key phrase that we've then worked on for the first half term.
Now we're working on stamina and resilience. So remember that thing when we came back to school, we're working on our physical stamina, but also our mental stamina. Can we continue to do something for a long period of time? Also looking ahead for some people who are working really hard, even when they find it quite tough, to carry on going, maybe even encouraging their partner. So I'm looking.
Your quadricep is over here, and your hamstring is at the back of your thigh. your cup is over here, and when you use your cup in exercise, it turns from squishy to hard.
Just love that statement. It gets me every time. It turns from squishy to hard when we exercise. Brilliant, sold. So as you can see, just really being purposeful around how the school thought about what their pupils were presenting, how they need to really review the intent of their curriculum and really adapt some of those units and activities to really support the needs of their pupils. We're now going to move on to sort of looking at that through the PE premium lens and the key indicators. And at this point, just wanted again just to share some free resources for you. So we have a designated PE premium webpage, which has lots of resources on there, one of which is a PE premium toolkit, which really supports you to work through each key indicator. There's input there from head teachers, interpreting what that key indicator has meant for them, things that they've really focused on, and then very much looking at an opportunity to reflect on where you are, I guess, you know, with 8 years of funding, the journey your school's been on, and what's working well, but really where some of the gaps are and what you really want to target that funding on. So there's a performer that you can download, and you can record your reflections, and as I say, what you're going to start doing, what you need to really stop doing with that funding, and what you need to keep doing. So there might be some suggestions from today, and you know, feel free to note some of those headings down if you want to make any notes of some of these spending suggestions and ideas. But really useful process to go through, particularly at a time like now when we do need to think a bit differently about the funding, and really useful, I guess, as evidence in terms of really, you know, feeding this into your action plan and some of the decisions that you've been making. So if we first focus on key indicator 1, which we know is all around building in physical activity into the school day and making sure that we're building in 30 active minutes and influencing the 30 active minutes at home. What's really important within this, when we're thinking about where we invest and how we really impact on this, some of those pockets of physical activity in the day, don't get me wrong, are brilliant, and it's really important to do that. But we've got to think much more bigger picture and how we start to influence culture and ethos within the school. So the model on the left-hand side is Public Health England model, which looks at almost 8 principles to really start to change physical activity culture. So looking at very much at multi-component interventions. So things there around making sure that you are upskilling your workforce, so your teachers, your teaching assistants, your lunchtime supervisors, your pupils as leaders, and how some of that investment for key indicator 3 really looks at upskilling and making sure that there's that education piece, and there's also upskilling them to feel confident and competent to very much deliver. The importance of student voice. How often do we ask our pupils exactly what they enjoy doing, what they would like to do more of? And this is not only within active playtimes, within the classroom, within enrichment, it's also within the PE curriculum, making sure that we give them a voice and they have an ownership over what they're doing. Particularly around that physical literacy journey that I spoke about in the other session, it's really important that pupils have a contributing role and ultimately that they enjoy what they're doing. And then there's all the other principles there, but it's a really great document. If you, like I say, if you Google Public Health England, 8 principles to physical an active school, it really breaks down each of those. And as a school, you can think about which ones you're doing really well within and which ones you really need to focus and target on. And then think about where your premium investment can be aligned, because some of them might not need funding, but some of them, you know, like active travel, for example, it might be invested in high-vis jackets to encourage families to walk to school. It might be investing in a couple of scooters for the school, and you know, a child or a family get the use of the scooter for a week, something like that, to really, you know, enthuse and excite families to actually travel actively to school. And I think there's probably a real opportunity within active travel right now, because there's still many parents that are working from home and aren't dropping off in the car and then going straight onto the office in the car. So maybe one to really unpick. But as I say, think about how you're ultimately changing culture and ethos. A lovely example that I always like to use is a school in West Yorkshire who had an Ofsted visit, and it's probably one of the most physically active schools that I know. And the Ofsted inspector asked some of the pupils how active they were during the school day, and the pupils said, "Oh no, we're not." And it's because for those pupils, it's the norm, it's part of every day, it's part of their routine. They don't see it as, oh, and now we're doing physical activity. It's almost not separating out and making activity discrete in its own right. It's the norm. And that's almost, I think, a really nice way of viewing it, that it's just what we do, and it's how, again, that cultural ethos in the school. So do think about that around your investment. Then the activity cards on the right hand side are again taken from free resources on our website that we did in partnership with Complete PE. Some of those are physical activity challenges, some of them are PE specific home learning, and a lot of schools utilise these during lockdown as part of the remote education offer. And some created packs that could go home with children that might have some basic equipment in, like a tennis ball, a beanbag, a skipping rope, and a couple of printed off activity cards. Now I know we're not there anymore, but we still might have classes that are self-isolating where you would still use this approach. And also, how are we taking this learning moving forwards? Why are we not doing this as an active homework or PE homework every week, where we're encouraging physical activity on a daily, weekly basis? We're building on that relationship that we've built with parents during this time, and we're really positioning the importance of physical activity. So anything that you've utilised during this time, think about how you can now repurpose that and still continue to use it, but also think about, again, that investment piece. What can you invest in to really foster this? Is it that you invest right now in bags, basic equipment and printed cards for every pupil in your school, or for every class in your school that goes home with them every day and comes back? That would be, an investment that would have a mass impact across physical activity levels. And then they could have maybe a physical activity diary or a PE home learning diary, many different options that you can build on that. So thinking back to the performer that I mentioned, just a chance for you to think right now, with key indicator, where are you now? What have you done around the physical activity agenda? Has it been active pedagogy focused across other areas of the curriculum? Has it been playtimes? Has it been enrichment? Has it been active travel? Think about what you've done to date. Think about the areas that you've maybe not tackled as much and where you might want to build some of that in. And what you might need to adapt and refocus through a COVID lens, because there are challenges. We know it may be harder right now with some of the components here, but things like active pedagogy and active learning across the curriculum, we know there's a real focus on that for many schools, and about getting them out of the classroom and getting them outdoors in the fresh air and being active and enhancing their learning in other areas. And then really question yourself on how sustainable that investment is and how that's going to impact long term for pupils. And then just to share a couple of action plan examples with you. So this one was specifically taken from a lockdown example. So like I say, schools have continued to invest during lockdown and just made it really purposeful to the context that they've been operating within. So their focus was really around maintaining fitness levels and inspiring an active lifestyle at home during lockdown. And this school used their sports coach to share with the school on Google Classroom's daily fitness videos and weekly skill-based PE lessons. And they, as I've mentioned, they did make up these resource packs with cards and equipment. In their instance, they just focused on target classes and families that most needed those resource packs. So depending on what funding you've got left will dictate, where you might target some of that resource. And then their impact in that space was very much around logging the activities and the engagement of pupils, doing things at home and utilising a home survey of families and measuring the increase in physical activity, motivation and enjoyment. So a really nice example of how that funding has still been utilised and still been purposeful even during the lockdown period. The other example is taken from the St Fidelis school, so the video that I've just shown, and this is how they utilised their funding after the first lockdown, so as pupils started to transition back. So everything that video spoke about, this is how they used some of their funding to align some of it. but also you don't always have to, you can document on your reporting template examples that haven't required any funding as well. So again, make sure you centralise anything you're doing that's having an impact. It doesn't always need to have a cost attached to it. And if you are interested in some of the work that St Fidelis School have done, they've got a fantastic Twitter account where they share lots of examples of things. So do have a look at that as well. So then just to finish off in terms of key indicator 1, some ideas of what to spend on if you're thinking, yep, we're sat on an underspend, I need to spend some of this funding. As I say, equipment and resources, really fundamental right now. If you use it as a chance to stock up your store cupboard, make sure that every bubble has an equipment pack, so you've not got this challenge around cleaning, transferring equipment and resource between classes and bubbles. Really utilise it to develop particular packs for them and look at that remote learning or homework pack opportunity. There's been so much investment in digital and technology approaches right now. How can some of that be used around PE and remote education and home evidence? So, you can justify some of that spend in more of the digital space if it's absolutely going to, support more PE homework or more activity happening at home, and it's evidencing that from families. One of the big things around physical activity and PE particularly is obviously wet weather. It's a really big challenge in this country, and often it means that children don't go outside. But actually in early years and in reception, we do it really well. Those kids tend to go out in most weathers. We put them in their boiler suits and their wellies and off they go, and they're really happy. It tends to be as we progress up into, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, we tend to see that it's more of an issue. And I often question whether that's the pupils or whether it's the staff that don't want to go out in the wet weather. But there's nothing wrong with investing in your PE premium in supporting children to be able to be active in all weathers. Boiler suits, outdoor footwear, shoe storage, so they can have maybe their indoor school shoes and they change into outdoor shoes. I know some schools who have done it have got fantastic shoe storage per sort of classroom or per space when they come in and out. So do think differently about that sort of investment with your premium as well, which you might think doesn't directly impact on physical activity, but it absolutely does. It's facilitating and allowing those pupils and that staff member to get outside and encourage being physically active. So do think in that space. And do think as well around young leader training. As I say, young leaders are a valuable workforce in schools. It supports their wider development, their personal development, their life skills. How are we using some of our young leaders at the minute and training them to support peer-to-peer physical activity within their bubble and maybe at home if they've got siblings as well? So do have a look at options for young leader training. Then if we move on to key indicator 2, and this is obviously around the connection to whole school priorities and the role that PE and sport can play. And we know there's such a powerful correlation and relationship when we increase participation in physical activity and ultimately reduce sitting time. We know that improves physical, social and emotional well-being, and we know that this can lead to improved behaviour and cognition, which ultimately impacts on progress and achievement, which is where we know schools are still measured and where we know we want our pupils to get to in terms of those educational gaps. And we know there's so much research out there that supports the importance of physical activity. But add on top of that, as I say, the context right now, and for many, things that might be keeping your head teacher awake at night are ultimately going to be linked to pupil well-being, the trauma experience of lockdown, staff well-being as well. So do think about this key indicator in relation to where your school is right now and what they also, what your pupils and your staff need, and think about your investment through that lens. And as we shared in the first session, this is around thinking about really understanding, baselining the needs of your pupils, in a PE lens, aligning your units and your activities to make sure they're really purposeful and are really going to support the behaviours and the development that your pupils need, and really revising that intent. And if we think of this through investment point of view, so an example here may be that during lockdown, or remote learning, to really maintain high quality remote and in-school PE lessons which are aligned to the physical, social, emotional, cognitive needs of pupils. And this might be around what was being delivered in school to to vulnerable children and key worker children. And then the remote learning aspect, how you're still making sure that PE is front and centre and that there's still a focus on the social, emotional and cognitive domains of learning. So that might have been resource pack based, it might be equipment. And then when we think about the return to school, again, the importance of making sure that all pupils are having 2 lessons a week and really thinking about which units you're delivering and thinking about resources or training that's going to support that life skills approach, and very much thinking of that whole child development through PE. So that might be where some of that investment is being made around really reviewing your PE curriculum and making sure you've got the resources, the training, the equipment to really deliver a curriculum that's going to support the needs of your pupils right now. And then again, just to touch on what we did with Catherine, one of the tools there might be the resource that we mentioned in terms of the Complete Me. And this is actually a free resource because we're just sort of wanting to gain feedback from schools at the minute on it. Just mainly for our member schools. If you're a YST member school and or a Complete PE member school, this is something that you can utilise. And then if we move on to key indicator 3, and this is where I would challenge some of your investment to date. So a lot of CPD around teachers is built around obviously increasing their confidence and their competence to teach PE. And that's fantastic. You know, they may recognise that gymnastics, athletics are areas of the PE curriculum that they're not as confident with, and they want specific training on that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But actually what we've really need to start to do is really start to challenge perceptions of PE. In the primary space, there's a lot of primary generalists that may have had a really negative experience of PE themselves. I used to teach on the initial teacher training in Leeds, and it was really interesting when with the primary generalists that came for their PE, and the first session we'd really unpick what their relationship was with PE, what their own experience was. And some of them were so fearful just about the teacher training of PE, but then having to deliver PE because they'd had such a negative experience themselves. And I think we have to spend a bit more time really unpicking that and understanding at an individual level what those attitudes, beliefs, knowledge and understanding is around PE. And there's still a massive perception that PE is sport. And in some instances, some of our PE curriculums don't really support that because we have quite traditional models still. So the system on the left hand side, looking at this whole system approach to physical activity, it really starts with the individual and really looking at training that's going to support all of your staff to understand their own relationship with being active and their own perceptions of PE, and how we can start to support them and to change that. And the model on the left is taken from Sport England's previous strategy, the behaviour change model, and how we're always moving between the different levels, and that actually we need to understand all of our staff, what their own relationship with physical activity is, and again that culture and ethos piece, how we can bring them along the journey with us, so that we can make sure that we get the best out of them in terms of them as PE teachers, but also, you know, them as advocates for being physically active. So I would challenge you to think about your CPD of your staff a little bit differently going forwards, and think about courses and training that really does start to unpick much more of that behaviour change. And then it just brings it back to our blueprint, and really making sure, as I say, primary generalists are the experts of their pupils, and it's really sad sometimes when they have the fear of teaching PE, and they don't see the opportunity that the subject presents for them to really build the relationship with their class, to really understand their pupils, to see them in a different light. So I would always advocate that any training as well with your whole staff team again looks at defining what the purpose of PE is, and not only focuses on that physical competence and the physical side of PE, but really starts to educate on how powerful our subject is around the personal. And for some teachers that might sit much more comfortably with them because they could probably get their head around that side much more easily. And particularly when you start making those key cross-curricular links and how we can see connections to PSHE, you know, the relationships and health education agenda, you know, even some of our bigger topic themes that we deliver at primary. If teachers can see where PE sits and where PE's role is and how it can support some of that wider learning, then I think that's where we need to position some of our training going forwards. So do think about that when you're investing in CPD for staff, and obviously spend the time to get to know your staff and sort of where they're at with this. So some examples within your action plan might be that you look at staff training, particularly around the active learning agenda, because we know that physical activity piece and building it into the school day is so important. So things like organisations like Teach Active, who support teachers to deliver active learning in English and maths. It might be an investment there that really looks at pedagogy across the curriculum. As I say, you might really start to challenge staff perceptions of PE and start to influence behaviour change. We have just developed a new 2-hour CPD that specifically looks at that, and very specifically is a whole school CPD, so it can go within a staff meeting or an inset day, and links massively to a sort of our life skilled approach to PE, which is our My Personal Best resource. And then really it's around making sure that we're ensuring all teachers are teaching 2 hours of PE per week, and we know obviously how important that is. And resources such as the Complete PE interactive teaching and learning platform, which obviously Catherine is the founder of, very much look at that whole model of support for teachers and support the planning, delivery and assessing of high quality PE, and do look at that personal development of the child as well as the physical. So a really useful resource and a real sustainable investment to support teacher confidence and competence. And then, as I say, on the right hand side is how we would really look at that impact piece and how we would make sure we've got that data and evidence across pupil voice, staff insights and surveys, as well as any wider data in school. And that's just an overview in terms of what to spend on across key indicators 2 and 3. So just thinking a little bit differently about where you invest. So just some ideas there. And then just to close with the same visual that we used in the last presentation around this importance of impact, and thinking about how you really evidence where your start point is, what your absolute need is and why you're investing your funding in this way, and what your intervention or implementation approach is, and ultimately where you know the journey you've been on and what the impact has been. So as I say, we often see examples of this in action plans, which doesn't really provide any concrete impact, and what we're ideally wanting to move to, and this one is a staff CPD example, is this that's really evidence-led, understanding the needs of your school, your pupils. So here it's that staff confidence showed that only 30% of teachers were confident in dance, and then predicting that by the end of the year 100%, and then what that impact was by the end of the year, you know, utilising staff survey and data and insights. And then just to share a couple of other resources with you. So on the PE Premium web pages on the Youth Sport Trust website, we have basically gone through each key indicator and made suggestions of YST solutions, as well as some of our partner solutions that may particularly support you with that specific key indicator. So if there are things that you're wanting to work on, do have a look at that for some of the resources, training, CPD that can really support you to do that. And then we've made it even easier, and we've packaged up a PE premium support package, which is costed at £199, and basically has a little mix of everything in there across all key indicators to support things like wellbeing, influencing governors' awareness of PE in school sport, curriculum mapping guide that we mentioned in the last session, and wider webinars and training. So do have a look at those elements. And then obviously just to mention, because I've mentioned throughout, the Complete PE platform, as I say, is basically everything in one place to really support teachers to be confident and competent to deliver high quality PE. So the videos that you saw today were taken from the Complete PE platform. Thorough sequences of learning there that look at the success criteria across all the domains of learning. Our My Personal Best and top PE resources are embedded within the platform, so you can access all of them, but importantly they're embedded within the sequences of learning, so you can click on and access that particular resource card at that point of planning. So really useful platform, and they do offer a free trial, non-committal, for 6 weeks, so you can see if it's something that works for your school and your teachers. And then just to close from me, just to say thank you. So there's the link to the PE Premium webpage that I mentioned, with lots of information, resources, blogs and things to support you within the PE Premium space. And there's my email again if anybody has any further follow-up questions.
Oh, Emma, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. There is so much practical things that subject leaders can take into school tomorrow and just do. It's been like a one-stop shop for training for subject leaders today. There's so many practical things they can take away, from like the repurposing of stuff we've already got to make it into active homework, to the use of all the different ways to spend the school sports premium. So I've made a huge list to share with the subject leaders that I work with. So thank you so much. We're overrunning ever so slightly, so if we get any questions, are people all right to contact you on Twitter or anything? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on Twitter, and I'm Mac Hogg on Twitter. Or yeah, please do email me, and I can obviously arrange a phone call or anything if there's questions and things. But
I can't tell you how useful that was. It was just absolutely brilliant. So many things people can just pick up and use and get started with. And I think you've given subject leaders who are watching great confidence as well, to know that a lot of the things that they're doing are the right thing, and how to best support their staff in school. So thank you, Emma, that was really good. Thank you.
no, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.